All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome back to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here today because honestly, we're tackling something that impacts literally every single interaction you have, every single day. We're on day 5, active listening, the skill everyone skips. And look, I want to be totally upfront with you right away. This is something almost all of us dramatically overestimate our ability to do. We kind of figure, hey, I have ears, I hear words, so obviously I'm listening, right? But hearing and active listening, they're two completely different universes. So get ready to look at your daily conversations in a whole new light.
So, I want you to genuinely reflect for a second. Are you actually listening? Seriously, think about a conversation you had just this morning. Maybe it was with your partner over coffee or a colleague on a quick call. When they were talking, were you 100% focused on their words, their tone, their actual meaning? Or, and you've got to be completely honest with yourself here, were you kind of just waiting for them to stop making noises so you could say that really smart thing you just thought of? It's a slightly uncomfortable question, isn't it? It totally challenges us right out of the gate. But that little sting of realization, that is exactly where we need to be to start improving. Because until we admit our default habits, we can't possibly upgrade them.
Which brings us to section 1, respond versus understand. You see, there isn't just one way to process a conversation. There are actually two entirely different, actively competing modes. You're either listening to respond or you're listening to understand. And these aren't just, slightly different techniques. They are fundamentally opposed goals in any interaction. When your goal is to respond, your focus is entirely internal. It's all about you, your opinions, your rebuttals, that funny story that kind of relates to what they just said. But when your goal is to understand, your focus shifts entirely external. It's about them and getting to their underlying message. You literally cannot occupy both mindsets at once. You have to make a choice. Let's look at section 2, the anatomy of bad listening. We all know the feeling of a totally rushed exchange. The conversation is moving a million miles an hour, someone says something, and instantly, boom, a dozen thoughts fire off in your brain. You're grasping for words, you're practically vibrating with the need to jump in and get your point across before the moment passes. In practice, this bad habit looks like interrupting the speaker, just cutting them off mid-sentence because you physically can't hold your thought in any longer. Or hey, even if you do keep your mouth shut, you're secretly planning your reply while they're still talking. This completely derails any real connection. If your internal monologue is busy drafting your next brilliant point, you are basically deaf to what the other person is actually saying in that moment. Now let's flip it. Section 3, the anatomy of good listening. Let's take a collective deep breath and just intentionally slow things down. Notice how just dropping the pace completely changes the vibe? That's exactly what good listening does to an interaction. It removes the panic, it removes that weird competition for airtime. It really comes down to 3 habits: reflecting on what was said, pausing, and asking follow-ups. These are basically the active mechanics of empathy. When you consciously reflect on someone's words, you validate their experience. When you take a deliberate pause, you give their thoughts actual room to breathe. And when you ask thoughtful follow-up questions, you prove you're truly engaged with their reality, rather than just shutting them down with your own agenda. The absolutely crucial point here is this: true understanding requires a pause. Just think about that for a second. We are so heavily conditioned to fear silence in a conversation, aren't we? We treat a pause like it's this incredibly awkward gap that has to be filled immediately. But substituting that rush to interrupt with a simple, intentional pause, it fundamentally changes the depth of the entire exchange. That pause is an empty space. It's processing time. It's the exact moment where hearing actually transforms into understanding. So, how do we actually do this? Section 4, the repeat back technique. I know exactly what you're thinking. Okay, but how do I actually stop myself from jumping in when I'm in the heat of a conversation? Well, this brings us to the ultimate actionable solution: a way to instantly pull yourself out of a bad listening exchange and lock right into a good one. If you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer today, I want you to burn this golden rule into your memory. Repeat it back before you respond. I know, it sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? But the psychology behind this is profoundly powerful. It acts as an immediate circuit breaker for your ego and completely short-circuits your natural urge to talk over people. Let's break down exactly how this works in practice. Step 1, listen, like actually hear them. Step 2, summarize what you heard. And finally, step 3, respond. Look really closely at that second step. By forcing yourself to summarize their point out loud, you are physically blocking your brain's ability to plan your own reply. You literally cannot formulate your own argument if your immediate assigned task is to accurately reflect theirs. It's wild, but it works. It forces you completely into the listening to understand mindset and ensures the other person feels entirely heard before you even introduce your own thoughts into the mix. It is just brilliant in its simplicity. Which brings us to our final challenge for today. In your very next conversation, can you summarize the other person before replying? I am legitimately challenging you to take this explainer out of your screen and into the real world today. You don't have to wait for some high-stakes meeting either. Try it with your spouse, try it with a friend, try it with the barista at the coffee shop. When they finish speaking, just say, "So what I'm hearing is," and give them a quick summary. Watch their reaction. Watch how their posture naturally relaxes. Watch how the dynamic instantly deepens. It's such a small change, but I promise you, upgrading your active listening skills will completely transform the way the world responds to you. Give it a try and see what happens when you finally stop listening to respond and actually start listening to understand.